Climate change has become the greatest threat to our planet. There are others. This is the greatest. This image here was right next to me, was designed by a climate scientist named Ed Hawkins. From left to right, these are called warning stripes. In fact, this whole work of art is called warning stripes. It visualizes our planet's annual average temperature from 1850 over here to 2018 over there, going from deep blue to a brilliant orange and red. And what this design fails to capture is just how menacing these rising temperatures have been and will continue to be for our planet, and what this means for all of us who inhabit this planet today and will in the years to come. Our rising seas are already at the highest levels ever recorded. Our nation's leading scientists have warned us that if we fail to start seriously reducing carbon emissions now, by the end of this century, we may well witness sea level rise another 6 feet. I'm 6 feet tall. Another 6 feet of sea level rise, it puts large parts of the United States and, frankly, island nations around the world underwater. Underwater. The East Coast, West Coast won't look like it does today. For America alone now, that would result in an estimated $3.6 trillion, that's trillion with a T, $3.6 trillion in cumulative damages to our country's coastal properties. Think Gulf Coast, think West Coast, think East Coast, think Great Lakes. $3.6 trillion in cumulative damage to our country's coastal properties and infrastructure over the next 70 years. I might add, the flood insurance program for our country is, last time I checked, billions of dollars, maybe tens of billions of dollars underwater in the red already. While global temperatures warm, ice caps melt, sea levels rise, we also know that extreme weather that we're witnessing throughout the world is not going to get better, it's going to get worse. The devastating hurricanes and typhoons, torrential rains and catastrophic floods, the heat waves and drought-fueled wildfires will only become more dangerous and more disruptive to our economy and to our lives. Let's take a look at one of the places where that's happened just last month. This is a visual from a real picture from Australia. It's not a movie, it's a real picture. Australia. The world watched in horror last month as bushfires scorched millions of acres of forest in Australia, an area the size of my native state of West Virginia. At least 25 people died in those brush fires, including 3 American firefighters. Experts initially estimated that 500 million animals died in those bushfires. More recently, that was doubled to 1 billion animals died. 1 billion. One country. Our country, meanwhile, has been no stranger to tragedy and devastation caused by wildfires, fueled by drought and heat, like those that continue to plague the state of California. Scientists tell us that by 2050, we could face wildfire seasons that burn up to 6 times more forest area each year than today. I'll say that again. Wildfire seasons that burn up to 6 times more forest area each year than today. If we do nothing to address carbon emissions, the extreme weather events we're experiencing now will pale in comparison to the devastation that lies ahead. Last year, some 13 agencies across the Trump administration released a report that predicted that the United States could see climate-related losses of up to $500 billion by the end of this century. $500 billion. If we do nothing, the effects from climate change could slash up to 10% of our gross domestic product by the next century, more than double the losses of the Great Recession. How much is 10% of our GDP? More than double the losses of the Great Recession. This is something provided to us, I think, by the United Nations. And it's called UN Warning. In order to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change, the world's leading scientists have warned us that we need to limit global warming to more than a 0.5 degree increase in Celsius. A 0.5 degree increase in Celsius, period. To do that, humanity would need to collectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by the next century. Right now, we're not on track to meet that goal. I wish we were. And we're dangerously close to losing our only shot. As the latest United Nations annual emissions gap report made clear, collective global efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions are falling short and time is running out. If we want to avoid the most catastrophic impact of climate change, we need to step up. We need to step up our game. This is a chart that indicates the countries that are not in the Paris Accords. It looks like, I'm looking at all these countries here. I see only one that's in red. That must be the only country today that is not in the Paris Agreement. The climate crisis is one that can be solved only by everyone who shares this planet coming together and working together as one. That's why nearly 200 nations came together in common cause to implement the climate Paris Agreement and why they're working together to find solutions to climate crisis. But instead of leading the world in this fight, America stands alone. We know the EPA already has the authority and tools to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but under the Trump administration, EPA's policies have been used to increase harmful emissions, not decrease them. President Trump is putting America in the slow lane while much of the rest of the world races toward a global clean economy. President Trump claims Americans must choose between a healthy economy on one side and a healthier planet on the other side. And the words of a good friend of mine, that, my friends, is malarkey. Or in the words of our president, that's, you can fill in the blank and come up with whatever you do. Choosing between environmental progress and economic growth is a false choice. On the one hand, we do face a very real choice. One was made clear in the UN report released this past December. We either act now on climate change or, quote, we face the consequences of a planet that has been radically altered by climate change, close quote. I say, let's choose to save our one and only planet Earth, and I say that it's time for the U.S. to once again lead the world in this fight. Next chart, we're going to take a look at something called the Clean Economy Act, which we introduced yesterday with over 30 co-sponsors. I introduced it with our colleagues, 33 of them actually, legislation that will put the United States on a path to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. The Clean Economy Act heeds the call for bold climate action while fostering economic growth that's fair for everyone. The Clean Economy Act empowers the EPA to use the authorities and tools already at its disposal to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by no later than mid-century, by no later than 2050. This is the quickest way we can jumpstart government-wide climate action by empowering agencies to use the tools they already have. The Clean Economy Act builds upon successful climate programs in states and cities and private companies and ensures economy-wide climate change action continue, regardless of who sits in the Oval Office. Our legislation sets important guardrails to make sure all Americans reap the benefits as we move our country toward net zero emissions. And here are just 3 examples of those protections. The Clean Economy Act minimizes costs. First, EPA must maximize greenhouse gas emission reductions while minimizing costs to consumers and providing regulatory flexibility to industry. Our next flow chart basically prioritizes environmental justice. EPA must consider under legislation and protect frontline communities. We know climate change disproportionately affects impoverished and disadvantaged communities, communities of color, and indigenous communities. More often than not, these communities are downstream, downwind from dangerous pollution, located near industrial facilities or factories, or located in areas that are already experiencing flooding and extreme weather fueled by climate change. This legislation, our legislation, will prioritize input from and investment in those communities. Our next chart on the Clean Economy Act prioritizes American workers. The Clean Economy Act focuses on American competitiveness and on the American worker. Our legislation compels EPA to use American workers, domestic materials, and strong labor standards to get the job done. Relying on our country's talents to make the transition to net zero emissions by no later than 2050. No later than 2050. The Clean Economy Act also requires EPA to work with other federal agencies on programs to protect and uplift communities and workers displaced or dislocated by our transition to a cleaner economy in places like West Virginia, where my sister and I were born. This legislation will not come at the expense of jobs or economic growth. Moving toward a clean economy will drive innovation and create millions of new jobs here at home. The Clean Economy Act is about realizing our true economic potential, potential that under this administration, sadly, has gone untapped. Clean Economy Act hits what we call the sweet spot between organized labor, business, community, and environmental group support. And I just want to thank the many organizations who helped us in crafting our bill, Clean Economy Act, including the Environmental Defense Fund, Moms Clean Air Force, the League of Conservation Voters, NRDC, Environment America Blue Green Alliance, utility workers. I also want to thank the organizations who joined me yesterday in unveiling this legislation, including United Steelworkers, Sierra Club, National Wildlife Federation, and Ceres. To say the least, it's disappointing that President Trump has decided to abandon the tremendous economic opportunity to create millions of additional clean energy jobs. There are already 3 million clean energy jobs. There are, sadly, for the folks in West Virginia and Wyoming, places like that, for them, they've lost a lot of coal mining jobs. They're down, I think in the country, we're down to about 65,000. But folks who can be trained to mine coal can be trained to create windmill farms off of our coast. Folks who have the skills to be able to mine coal have the ability to help create corridors of fueling stations for hydrogen and natural gas, and heavily trafficked corridors across our country to create the charging stations for electric-powered vehicles and heavily traveled corridors across our country. And what we need to do, part of our policy and part of what we try to do in this legislation is to make sure that we look out for those workers and help make sure they have a place to go and a way to support themselves and their family, while at the same time leading us to cleaner air to breathe and a healthier planet to call home. I think it's shameful. It's not just unfortunate. I think it's shameful that this president has forsaken our country's leadership in his fight for our one and only planet, that this president has abandoned our global allies for the sake of misplaced political gain. And that abdication of leadership will, I think, be a dark and indelible stain on his legacy. But while President Trump may not be up for the climate challenge, our colleagues and I, are here to say to the world that a majority of Americans are ready for it. We're ready for that challenge. We have faith in American innovation. We have faith in American workers to take on this climate fight and win it. The Clean Economy Act will put the United States on a path to once again lead the world in the fight against climate change while lifting up American communities and American workers. This bill corrects our president's failure to lead on this issue and directs EPA and other agencies to move swiftly to address this serious problem for the good of our planet and for the strengthening of our economy and the creation of even more new jobs. Famed economist John Kenneth Galbraith once said these words, and I quote him, that all the great leaders have one characteristic in common. It was the willingness to confront unequivocally the major anxiety of their people in their time. This and not much else is the essence of leadership. That's worth repeating. All the great leaders we have had share one common characteristic. That's the willingness to confront unequivocally the major anxiety of their people in their time. This and not much else, he said, is the essence of leadership. I'm Tom Carper, and I approve that message. The Clean Economy Act is our message to the rest of the world about climate leadership. The United States is preparing to once again lead the fight against this climate crisis. America, let's roll.